Hello, this is Congressional Update with Michael Capuano. I'm Sarah Fishman. I hope you appreciate the new, now age-accurate intro to this show.
I like the old one.
The old one was good
Maybe
too,
look like
but this one's, as you said, your children are no longer 6 in this one, so it's more accurate. How are you doing?
Fine, how are you?
I am okay. So, as opposed to other places in the world where things have not been okay. And we should talk about that. So, the attack on the satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo in Paris, that was just a week ago, I think.
Yeah, about that, yeah.
Yeah. How, and between that and the attack on the kosher market at the other end of Paris, it was what, like 17 people who died, or it was?
That sounds about right. I don't know the number.
It was some police, some civilians, so it seems that there was a lot of prior information on the 2 perpetrators of the shooting at the magazine, the brothers. Did France government officials or security, did they miss something in?
I don't know.
Was there a prevention opportunity that was
I mean, there's
missed?
always a prevention opportunity, but at the same time, at what cost of civil liberties? I mean, there's a balance to be had. I don't know enough about the details of this case, obviously, to really have an opinion on the matter. But it always bothers me when people second guess the police for not, arresting everyone they've ever met, immediately. And they can't do that. That's unreasonable. If they had done that, then civil libertarians around the world would be in chaos. So without knowing the details of this case, in general, I think the police do a pretty good job to balance our desire for security with our demand for civil liberties.
So there have been various talking heads saying that if somebody leaves a Western country and goes to the Arabian Peninsula or a similar place for training and comes back seemingly a jihadist, that's someone who should be tracked. But how does one determine, that versus I went to go see my dying uncle kind of thing?
Well, and on top of that, you don't necessarily know where people went. I mean, we don't all have tracking devices embedded in our body. You might go to Turkey and not, they're
and
not
in this
telling you
case,
when
the
you travel
brothers
from
switched
Turkey.
passports, it seems.
Yeah, again, I don't know the details of the case. I mean, and if it's obvious that you went to Yemen without any particular familial reason, I have every reason to believe that the authorities would keep you under closer scrutiny.
So is that appropriate in your mind?
Sure, I think it is.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
And is there the resources?
But not necessarily house arrest. I mean, it means, okay, there's somebody who has taken action to do something that's, suspicious.
It just seems like it's very nebulous.
It's hard. I mean, again, hindsight's 20/20. Oh yeah, we knew this guy was a bad guy. Well, they get a list of hundreds of bad guys, or potential bad guys that may never do anything wrong. Are they supposed to arrest all of them?
Mm-hmm. How does this compare in your mind with the marathon bombing? I mean, there are some striking parallels, creepy kind of parallels. We have 2 sets of brothers. We have a manhunt that lasted a couple of days.
I've said for a long time that I think the biggest danger, it's not the biggest danger, the most frequent danger, I guess I should say, is going to be these lone wolves, or in this case, a small group of people. I think the idea of a fully blown, organized terrorist attack like 9/11 was, has probably been, I won't say you'll never eliminate it, but significantly minimized.
By government action?
Yeah,
or
by government action and societal awareness now. The individual nuts that roam the streets, they don't come to places that normal people can see.
But aren't these people sort of in between? Because
yeah, absolutely. I assume most of them.
One of them, the younger brother in the French case, he had $20,000 or something like that.
Well, the kid who just got arrested in Ohio, you saw his father on TV just today, saying, "Oh my God, I could never believe this. I knew he'd become a Muslim, but I never thought he'd do this."
Yeah.
Again, it's the same old story. I knew that person was going to do that when I met him at the Star Market. Well, no, you didn't. and it's a dangerous world, and for me, I choose to live in the world that we have today because I cherish civil liberties. I cherish, which I think is what this French thing is really not all about, but a lot of it. Look, the magazine was doing things that I found offensive. I don't think you should be mocking other people's religion. but I also defend their rights to do it, and I defend my right to think that they were idiots to do it. But that doesn't mean they should die for it. And I think that's the difference between our society and their society. We are an open society that
Who's the there in this case?
the people that did the attack. They want to live in a closed society where they or their friends are the only ones who are the sole determinant of what's right to say, what's right to believe, what's right to act. We live in a society that understands I can believe one thing, you can believe another. We can disagree, and I can think bad things about you, but we have to find a way to live together.
Have you talked with any Muslim leaders in this area?
Not lately, but over the last several years, sure, absolutely. And most of them, like everything else, most Muslims are perfectly fine, wonderful human beings who want to live in a peaceful world.
Extremism is extremism of any
Well,
stripe.
look, having grown up in Somerville, we had a current, he's still writing, he's a well-known writer in one of our media outlets, say that everyone who ever lived in Somerville should have a fence thrown around the city and given 5 to 10 because we had some criminals who lived here. I'm of Irish and Italian descent. There have been bad things said about both of those ethnicities, because there are some people of that descent that are not very nice people. And those generalizations, if you feel comfortable making them, you go right ahead and do it. But it's just not right, and I personally don't think it's fair.
All right, shifting a little bit. Zohar Tsarnaev, his trial for the marathon bombing is sort of beginning. They've started jury selection. I think they impaneled 1,000, or they will have impaneled 1,000 people. Now, the defense had 2 requests. One, that the trial be delayed because apparently they got a whole bunch of new information, so they say. And 2, that the venue should be moved from Eastern Massachusetts because it's impossible to have an impartial jury. Do you have opinions on those?
Again, I tend to leave legal, maneuverings to people in the court that know the details of the case.
But just as a person.
I mean, as a general point, they both. I mean, every major case seeks delays. I mean, they all do, and so it doesn't surprise me. I expect we'll see it again. As far as changing the venue goes, look, based on what this guy is charged with having done, I don't think you're going to find, a more neutral place than Boston will be.
Really? Why?
Well, you tell me. Would you be any more neutral if this had happened in Oklahoma and they wanted to move it to Boston? The answer is probably not. If you're not neutral, you're not neutral. If you're not objective, you're not objective.
Well, the thing is, though, if you're
Do I
talking
feel
about
any worse about this guy than I did about the guy who blew
But
up?
if you're talking about exposure, if being less exposed makes it more likely that one is neutral.
Well, that's why they impaneled 1,000 people, is because it may be a little bit more difficult to find
I just can't see how they're going to get even a couple hundred. I mean, almost everyone I know knows somebody who was there.
Well, and they
not
will
just
be,
aware of it, but who was physically there.
And they will be cut out. I mean, yeah.
But like so many people.
But not everybody.
Well, also,
if they go through 1,000 people and they cannot find a jury or whatever the number is going to be, then they should consider changing it.
I think the judges even said that
could be
done.
I didn't know that.
I think. So one of the arguments is for changing it. Well, there are 2 arguments. One is, could this be a basis for a mistrial? I mean, if they impanel some and then maybe somebody after the fact says, oh, by the way, I actually...
Even if it's a mistrial, which it doesn't mean he gets off free. It means we have to go through this again. This guy is not getting out of jail, period.
Yeah. No get out of jail free card.
No. So therefore, even if it's a mistrial and somebody in the Justice Department has made a mistake, it just means we have to do it over again.
Now, the other thing is, Timothy McVeigh, who was the bomber in the Oklahoma City bombing, his trial was moved from Oklahoma to, I think, Denver, and he was still...
Like I said.
He was executed.
Yeah, well, that is a question, I think, that is more pronounced here. Can you find... I mean, this is a federal crime.
Yeah.
Federal crimes are subject to the death penalty. State crimes are not.
Right.
I think that is a bigger question, whether you'll find a jury pool that is both neutral and willing to impose a death penalty. I personally would have to exclude myself because I would not impose the death penalty.
So that's what I was going to ask you. I thought that there was one point where we had discussed this where I don't know that you said that Tsarnaev should get the death penalty, but you...
Me? No, I would tell you, I don't know what I said, but I know how I feel. I don't believe in the death penalty, period.
Period. Okay.
But at the same time, if you were going to have a death penalty, if my argument lost, and you required someone to impose it, this is not a bad place to start.
I think that's what you'd said before.
I
and I'm glad you repeated it so I didn't get it wrong.
I'm glad I got it the same.
Yes, I believe you did. So, okay. So we wait and see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, this guy's never getting free. I mean, period. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
And I have no doubt about it. Now, how many hoops and jumps do we have to make to do that? I don't know, but there's just no question. I mean, it's already been quite a while since the bombing, so
Yeah.
the trial has really not really begun. So
No.
it takes time.
So going back to France for a moment, there was this big unity march on Sunday that was apparently the largest thing of its kind since World War II. There were 40 world leaders, including Netanyahu from Israel and Abbas from Palestine. They didn't link arms, but they were in the same front row. And we kind of weren't there. We sent our French ambassador, who my father pointed out was wearing her sunglasses the whole time and not in the front row. So was that some sort of faux pas?
Yes, I think the president has acknowledged that.
Faux pas, French.
We should have sent as higher-ranking individual as we could do. If the president, fine. If not, maybe his wife, maybe the vice president, the secretary of state, whoever.
Well, Kerry was already abroad. He was.
But I don't know what they're doing every day. I mean,
Yeah.
they might have more important things to be doing that day. I don't know. But I think the answer is yes, it was a faux pas. I think the president has said so. But I also think it was an overblown faux pas, if you want the truth. Yes, it was. We should have done more.
Okay.
But those who've made a big deal out of it, I think, have blown it out of proportion.
Okay. So the organization claiming responsibility for the attack is Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, which is actually ISIS in Syria is actually an opponent, right? They're
a competitor.
A competitor. So does this change the whole sort of terrorism landscape? Are we seeing?
No, I don't think so. I mean, when there is a spotlight, there will always be more than one person trying to grab that spotlight. That's what's going on in the world of terrorism as well. They're not the only two, but they're the two biggest at the moment.
Okay. All right, and then this sort of goes back to what do we do with people who we think might be suspect in doing future terrorist acts. It's loosely connected, but Guantanamo Bay, that was supposed to be closed. Can you explain why it hasn't been closed yet?
Nope, I can't. I've always thought that it's been misfocused to concern yourself with whether Guantanamo is open or closed. To me, that's not the issue.
So what do we have? We have like 127
yeah, I don't know how many are left at
men
the moment.
who have been accused of, can you just?
Well, I mean, that's where they take people that they think are involved with terrorist activities against the United States' interests, and they take them from all around the world, and they center them there.
And they've been there for years.
Some have, many have not. Many have
Well,
been
there used
there
to
and
be
have been
over
released.
400 people.
Well, many
so-
have been released because they get arrested without trial, without real legal proceedings. And at some point, somebody, whoever arrested them, made a decision, yeah, well, not really. Sarah's really not that dangerous. Let him go.
Thank you.
And to me, that's the problem. The problem is not the physical location of Guantanamo, and the problem is not what we do with the people who are legitimately bad people. I'm really not concerned with that. Throw them in jail for the rest of their lives. It's fine by me. The question
but
is,
there's no due process.
There's no process at all. And again, they're not American citizens. They're not entitled to the same rights. But they should be entitled, and we should want them to be entitled as Americans.
You would think.
To be treated humanely. And humanely means, were the people who grabbed you and brought you here, did they have it right, or did they really mean to get your brother? And I'm not saying that most of them weren't. I don't know. But it does run a risk. The very same people that thought that Mr. Smith was dangerous enough to grab in the middle of a street in some other country and drag him around the world to Guantanamo, that very same person then says, nah, he's not that dangerous anymore, let him go. And that's exactly what's happened to hundreds of people. Now, I don't think they let them go because they all of a sudden felt good one day, or because of pressure from people who think that Guantanamo should be closed. They let them go because they made a decision that this individual wasn't as dangerous as we originally thought, or is no longer as dangerous as we originally thought. Which, to me, again, draws a big, bold line under should that have happened in the first place.
And one of the things I don't understand is it seems like when people are imprisoned, at least if they're together, that there's this radicalization that can happen because
I don't think they
is
really
that
spend
true, or is it
in
not?
Guantanamo, they don't spend much time together.
Are they
They're
isolated?
relatively isolated, yeah.
From each other?
And again, if they are truly guilty of the heinous acts that some people think they are, I have no problem with that. I'm not looking to be nice to bad people. I'm looking to tell the difference between bad people and not so bad people.
So what should happen to those
not
people?
for them, but for us. I don't think our society should lower ourselves to the point we just imprison anybody we feel like it.
It's kind of creepy. It's kind of
I
very
don't think it's what
un-American.
America stands for. I think it opposes America's ideals. I'm not trying to be namby-pamby about it. Again, the people that we know, absolutely unequivocally, that's why I have defended the drone strikes when they are targeted properly at the right people. Bad people exist and they need to be dealt with. It'd be nice if we could arrest them all, but if we can't, then killing them is a pretty good option. They're trying to kill us. They played the game. They decided what the rules were. Those don't bother me. What bothers me are the people that we arrest, keep for years in isolation under very horrendous conditions, and then just let them go.
So what should happen with the people who are left there?
Well, again, I think individually they should be decided as to whether how bad they are. If they're really that bad, I don't really care where they go.
I see. Okay.
But the ones that shouldn't be there, first of all, they shouldn't have been there in the first place.
Right.
And I without the information, which we don't have, and if I had it, I couldn't tell you anyway. But
you wouldn't be able to.
I wouldn't, but
yes.
I wouldn't be allowed by law to tell you, and I wouldn't tell you. But most of that information is not available, which is why hundreds of them have been captured, held, and then released voluntarily.
Yeah.
Voluntarily by the United States government.
Okay, so you made reference to drone strikes. In terms of U.S. action against ISIS, against the caliphate forming there, can you explain under what authority the U.S. is acting now? In other words,
they have authority to do it. They have authority to do it within Iraq, based on the Iraq authorization of military force.
But that's from like 2001 or something?
Yes, that I voted against. Yes.
Right.
I believe that's true.
So
there was no end date on that.
Okay, so there was no end date on that. But you have said in the past that if there's significant activity, such as there was in Libya, the Congress...
I didn't vote for it in the first place. I personally don't think it should apply, whether it does or doesn't legal. I'm just telling you what they think.
You don't think that
says.
authorization should apply to
I don't.
ISIS because it's not just Iraq?
I don't think, first of all, I think it's a different
Seems like a
activity.
different can of worms.
It's a different, it is. Nonetheless, I'm just telling you legally that's what they argue, is that they already have the authorization.
So how come you weren't kicking and screaming that Congress should be voting on this?
I have kicked and screamed a little bit, but we have a new Congress, and most people, of my view, lost. The people who won election don't have much concern with that. I am the minority party now, and a much smaller minority than we have been in 50 years. So I understand that. I can count.
I was going to ask you, does it feel different now that both the House
Too early
and...
to tell.
Too early to tell.
Yeah, we've only been in session 2 weeks, I think, and we're not doing much at the moment. So we're
Well,
just
you
getting
did
settled.
do something. There were these two amendments
Well, we've
to
done a couple
the
of things.
Homeland Security funding, which runs out at the end of February, right? And the amendments sort of undo some of the immigration, what some people will call reform.
They took the Homeland Security bill and attached a bunch of anti-immigrant amendments to it. Classic move from the extreme right. The Homeland Security bill in and of itself was relatively non-controversial.
Right.
But they added amendments to it that are completely extraneous and have nothing to do with it, probably will not become law, and force the House to vote on it.
Okay. So, and you voted against both of those
Yes.
amendments. Yeah. One of them would have reversed something that Obama called for in November, allowing some illegal immigrants to stay in the country and obtain work permits. And the other was the Dreamers, is
Yeah.
that what it's called? People who came here as children. when their
Both of
parents-
which actions I support only as temporary actions. I do
Right.
not like either one of them, except the Congress has refused, not failed. And there is a difference between failing and refusing to try. we have refused
Well, the
to
Senate
address.
tried.
The Senate did a bill that we could pass in the House tomorrow with overwhelming numbers, but the Republican leadership will not let it come to the floor. And that's the way the rules work. So that being the case, the House has refused to even consider any serious reform to the immigration law. So for me, that requires us to then take some temporary action. If we could pass comprehensive immigration reform, I think the president's actions, first of all, wouldn't have been necessary.
Right.
And second of all, then should be repealed. That way they become
Well,
irrelevant.
it would be better if this were legislated than if it
Much
were.
better. Much better. This is
For a
not
lot
the
of
way to run a
reasons.
government, but it's also, you don't stop doing what's right and what's necessary just because a handful of people have you tied up on one end.
So you're sort of alluding to this. Boehner is now, he's still Speaker of the House.
Yes.
Was that a squeaky? Did he squeak by, or did he?
Yeah, but it's hard to tell whether they would have really, I mean, none of them voted for Nancy Pelosi, so, I mean, there were 25, I think, was Republicans who voted for some other Republican.
Someone voted for Colin Powell.
I believe that was a Democrat, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, probably.
There were a few Democrats who did not vote for Nancy Pelosi, but there were three, I think. There were 25 Republicans who did not vote for John Boehner, and none of the Republicans voted for Nancy Pelosi, and none of the Democrats voted for John Boehner.
That's pretty stark there.
Yeah, well, it's also, again, everybody knew John Boehner was going to win, so it's kind of a preordained result. The only question is how many votes would he have against him?
I was reminded by my father that the Speaker of the House doesn't necessarily have to be a member of Congress.
That's correct. Some people, that's why Colin
Why
Powell
is
got
that
voted for.
Why is that true?
The Constitution's silent on the matter.
That's a very strange silence, don't you think?
It has never happened, and it's highly unlikely to happen.
It's still very odd. It's a curiosity.
I
Okay.
don't know.
We're coming back home now. Did you hear about, you probably know about on I-93, there were some protesters this morning who
Yes, I heard
stopped
about
in both directions?
Yes,
And were people arrested?
I believe that's what's being reported, yes.
This has just happened, right?
Yep.
So I believe it was the Boston chapter of Black Lives Matter that was organizing the protest.
That's what's being reported.
Do you have an opinion on that?
Their issue is valid.
action?
I support their concerns. I do. At the same time, it's not unusual to have people that you agree with in substance take actions that you think are contrary to that, to the goal.
Where did they even get all those barrels? I mean, I know that's not...
I don't understand how
under-
they, if the argument is, if they're just trying to make a statement, great, you made a statement, good for you. If they're trying to win the hearts and minds of the majority of the American people, that doesn't help.
Yeah.
You know, but at least that's my opinion. Obviously, no one anointed me with all the answers. If all they wanted was notoriety, they got it. But I also think that they jeopardize winning the hearts and minds of some Americans by doing actions like that.
The last time we did this show was in October, so that was before both the trials for the policeman that shot and killed Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, and Eric Gardner in New York City. So I haven't asked you anything about this. Do you think that those were valid results? Do
They
you
both,
think?
again, I share the concerns that have been expressed by millions of Americans that they raise a very serious question. I wasn't in the trials of either one of them, so obviously I don't know every single detail about all of them. I know what I've read. It certainly makes you wonder, especially the one in New York City, to me.
Yes.
Fine, okay, the guy he was a big, huge guy. When you have 6 cops on a guy that's not armed with a gun, there's no reason they should die.
They're not allowed to do chokeholds. It's
Well,
not allowed in the police department.
There are 1,000 ways it can happen. You could be beaten to death with a baton, and that shouldn't happen. Again, if it was for the sake of discussion,
Yeah.
if that same event happened and one punch was thrown, but that one punch resulted in a
was
death,
fatal.
those, again, you can't get it. That might be an accident. A chokehold is a different story.
Yeah.
I mean, and you know, in the one in Missouri, there are no witnesses, no film of any serious nature, so you can draw any conclusion you want. The one in New York, I think, raises more serious questions.
I think so too. Okay.
And
so,
either way, I mean, you know, the statistics are pretty clear that, you know, people of color are treated differently in general, not in every situation, and it is difficult for police officers to make some of these distinctions. But nonetheless, we need to be aware of it. People need to think of it, and they need to be conscientious of how we do it.
Is there anything
Very
you-
easy to say when you're not in the immediate problem of a police officer on the street. Nonetheless, society, I think it's perfectly right to raise the question and talk about it.
Is there anything different that you think should be done here, that should be done differently in the Boston area? Or
I don't
state?
know enough to answer that question. Again, I haven't followed every detail of it. I presume chokeholds are prohibited in Boston, but I don't know that. And if they're not, they probably should be. Again, except under extreme circumstances. When you got 6 cops on one guy or whatever the number was, that's not an extreme circumstance.
Yeah.
But I don't want to judge even those individual circumstances because I don't know the details. But I think it's perfectly valid for people to be upset with the results of them.
Yeah. All right, now we're going to come immediately home. And this is a softball in some ways. The Green Line extension
No, there you go.
has received $996 million of the $2.2 billion needed to extend it 4.3 miles from Leechmere to Medford.
You know more numbers than I do.
Well, I'm reading it from here, but yes, I do. So, is this kudos to you-dos? I mean, this is a lot of money. This has taken a gazillion years.
Yeah.
Is this now really going to happen?
Well,
Forgive my
There's still
disbelief, but
there are always lots of hurdles in these things. One hurdle is whether the federal government will participate in the construction. For the sake of discussion, people should know that the Greenbush line, the last major extension, I mean, Fairmount was a renewal that was built by the MBTA, it was a commuter rail line, didn't get a nickel of federal money. It was all state money. In this case, if it was all state money, it would never be built. We've always known we needed federal money. It's obviously, about 50% of it was federal money. And that being the case, this says the federal government has already promised its 50%.
So-
the next question will be whether the state will provide its 50%.
and we have a new governor.
A new governor, a
So
new
what-
legislature, new all kinds of things, an Olympics, a casino, all
Right.
kinds of things.
So what?
I don't know. I mean, now this is a very good thing from, as the federal representative of the region, it's a very good thing. It's kind of, I won't say it's the end of my game because I will still play with the state, but it's the end of the thing that really falls on me.
Okay, so if you had to put odds,
I'd say
what were the
better-
odds before versus now with this, for completion?
Before there was 0. Without federal money, there would
It
be
was 0,
never
okay.
going to happen.
And now what
Now
is
that we
it?
have federal money, I'd say they're even, maybe a little bit better than even. I'm not worried about the time frame that has been put out there by some. I have always said that.
2020.
I don't care. The time frames change, and now we have a new governor. He may look at the numbers. He's got a $500 million deficit, or whatever the number's going to be. I could see a situation where they get in and say, "Wait a minute, we can't do this on the time frame that they've already done. We have to stretch." And my argument, as long as it gets done and it's reasonable and it's thoughtful and it's not put behind some other big project, I will be happy to work with them. If they throw it off the table, we'll have a fight.
Okay, so this is what I don't get. How come Boston area is getting all this attention? And we also had the Orange Line stop. When there are so many places in the United States that certainly need infrastructure, transportation. Pardon?
They're getting it. I mean, a lot of them get the states and pretty much do what this money is eligible for anybody. You have to meet certain federal guidelines to match it. We're not the only project that has gotten this. We're not the only project that was in line. We have been in line
It
for
just
quite
seems
a
like
while.
we're so lucky. Is this because you've been doing backroom deals? I mean, it just seems like a real curiosity. I know it'll totally increase T ridership, but we're, parts
Well,
of cities
I don't
that
know
have
how to answer
gone
that
into
question.
default, East Side Chicago, Detroit. I mean,
That's
places that really, really
look.
need.
My job is to represent
help.
this area.
Yes.
And on occasion, that means making sure that the federal government recognizes our needs and desires. And sometimes that involves money. In this particular case,
It often involves money.
I am on the Transportation Committee. I'm the only Massachusetts member on the Transportation Committee. I worked hard at this. I have been pushing. I was
So did this happen
personally and
because of
political
you?
friends. I mean, how am I supposed to say that? And the answer is, I did my game, my my job. Others did well as well. I couldn't have done it without the state making the application. I didn't write the application. The state has to prioritize it. I worked very closely with Governor Patrick and the Massachusetts delegation. And I don't know, you'll have to ask the governor and others why they prioritized it. I mean, was it personally because of me? Or was it because of the mayor? Was it because, and the answer is it's everybody. It's the entire community pushing for this. It's Somerville having been receiving the short end of the stick for so long. It's a lot of different things. All I can tell you is I did my job.
Okay.
And I feel comfortable with that.
Okay, we have to stop, so I'm glad you did your job. This has been Congressional Update with Michael Capuano. Have a nice day.